let's start with the Clemson Tigers, still the kings of the ACC, the much maligned Clemson Tigers throughout the season. Everybody all year long was talking about how Dabo was not using the transfer portal, not adapting to modern college football. And lo and behold, we get to the first week of December, and who's the champions of the ACC? The Clemson Tigers. And yet, I still feel like this was kind of a baseline season, or maybe should be considered a baseline season for how Clemson played out. Of course, they lost 3 games in the regular season. They lost to South Carolina, still found their way to Charlotte to win the ACC championship. But it's really hard to appreciate a season like that when you think about it in the context of just the generational run that they were on.
Yeah, and Clemson, like, can we just take a second to take a big step back and just clap our hands for the Clemson Tigers for a second? Because what they've been doing for the last, I don't know how long, of college football has been fantastic. I pulled up some numbers. Since 2011, they have failed to reach the 10-win mark only once. They've had 10 or more every single season, a couple of national championships in there, obviously. And they really haven't done it being a massive portal player in recent years. Yeah, they had the 9-4 season in 2023. I'm not going to give them any crap for that. 9-4 is still a plenty good year. But that's, again, you're breaking in a young quarterback, and that young quarterback isn't quite so young anymore. He looks pretty dang good. Had a fantastic season this last year. I'm going to give my my brownie points to Cade Klubnik as well. Pulling up his statistics from this last year. Cade Klubnik going for 3,639 yards and 36 touchdowns. Take a bow. Congratulations, Cade Klubnik. You figured it out this year. For a guy that a lot of people were really questioning and kind of, maybe doubting going into the year, he looked really, really dang good. And the thing that I thought about Clemson, right, when we were breaking this down, I was like, do you remember Clemsoning? Like, do you remember that as a term?
Absolutely.
Like,
Yeah, that was the biggest thing for
yeah,
my early college football watching years.
it was just a meme, like, oh, Clemson, they blow it on the big stage, they never get it done. And, like, Clemsoning hasn't been a thing for so long. There's students in high school that don't know what Clemsoning means because it just hasn't been a thing. So, like, shout out to Dabo Sweeney. Give him all of his brownie points. Give him everything he wants because he's had a fantastic career there, and it's still going. I think a lot of people, myself included, last offseason were pretty skeptical about Clemson's ability to win going forward, despite the fact that, yeah, they've proven they can win, but they just weren't using the portal. They just weren't winning with the portal. They weren't going and utilizing that tool. And it didn't make sense either because why wouldn't you want to transfer to Clemson? If you're one of these, big time players at a smaller school, why would you not want an opportunity to come play for a powerhouse in a conference that really hasn't been all that competitive in recent years? I mean, again, they've got 9 conference championships since 2011. It's Clemson's conference. They're still the Kings. And it's just funny kind of thinking about, like, yeah, this year felt like a baseline for what they should be, expecting and achieving as a team. I'm looking at them this next year. ACC competition still overall not going to be that great. I think a couple of teams that maybe were pretty good last year, maybe taking a little step back. Again, Cade Klubnik, one of the best quarterbacks returning next year. For my money, I'd probably put him top 3. There's their wide receiver trio. They got Antonio Williams, Bryant Wesco, and TJ Moore, dynamic playmakers, over 2,200 yards and 21 touchdowns last year. Like, they're the number 1 team in returning production. This is going to be a very good Clemson team next year, and so I might kick it over to you again. But I mean, number one, Trey, how impressed were you with the job they did this last year? And then kind of a part B of that, what do you think it takes for Clemson to finish the job next year, maybe get a championship and make that their 3rd championship in the last decade plus?
I think you got to kind of put 2024 Clemson, you've got to take them out of the context of what Clemson has been for the last decade, right? Because objectively, they had a really good season last year. They had one of the most difficult non-conference schedules in the country. They played a playoff team in Georgia, a borderline playoff team in South Carolina, lost both of those games, and obviously those count in the loss column, but other than the what the heck is going on game against Louisville in conference play, they were their usual selves. They had a couple close games. They found a way to win almost all except for the Louisville game and found themselves holding the trophy at the end of the year. So And might I add that they played the closest first round game of all the teams that went on the road.
Mm-hmm.
They probably had the toughest draw in the Texas Longhorns, other than maybe Indiana, I guess, who got one of the toughest draws. We'll just say
Sure.
that.
It was
Going
up
to Austin, they were the 12 seed playing the 5 seed, and they played closest in the first round. So obviously the talent is there, but it's really hard to evaluate Clemson
there.
because
Mm-hmm.
they are leaps and bounds better talent wise than most of the ACC.
Yep.
And they took care of business, like I said, but it does leave you feeling just a little, wanting just a little bit more when you think about it in the context of what Clemson has been under Dabo Swinney for so
Mm-hmm.
long. So I think Cade Klubnik showed that he can be the next in line of the great quarterbacks at Clemson. Clemson's championships have come when they've had generational talent at the quarterback position with
Mm-hmm.
Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence. I think we're ready to start talking about Cade Klubnik. Not quite in the highest pedestal as obviously Trevor Lawrence was coming in. He was one of the most hyped recruits of all time. Cade Klubnik was a 5-star, but nowhere near the hype that Trevor Lawrence was.
Mm-hmm.
So, but Deshaun Watson was a guy that developed over his career, and by the time that he was a senior, was ready to lead them to national championships. So I'm excited to see what he can do next year. I think they're always going to have a favorable schedule in conference, and the way that this is set up right now, obviously it could change very quickly. We're on playoff change watch every single day, it seems like, but we are in a position where if they can win the ACC, they're going to have a shot to maybe still be a top 4 seed and get a bye and play neutral games only in the playoffs. So they certainly, if you're discounting Clemson just because they lost 3 games in the regular season this year, you're not really paying attention because they are going to be right there in the thick of it next year.
Yeah, and probably even improved because it's not like their defense was as shut down as we expected them to be. It was kind of a ho hum year for them, and I think they got a little bit exposed when they did play Texas. Some of those tackling issues, not being able to get out there and defend the boundary a little bit, but it ultimately it came back to bite them. That's a very good Texas team. I'm just kind of looking around college football right now, saying like a lot of the top teams from last year, I think got worse. And Clemson's one of those few teams that I think got a lot better just because they kept their guys, and I think those guys are just going to keep improving. You mentioned it, but Clemson is a place where players develop, right? They develop at Clemson. In order for them to have been as successful as they've been without the transfers that they've had, they get talent, but they develop their talent. They get their guys in house, they get their guys that want to commit to their process, and then they take them through that whole thing so that like even a guy like Cade Klubnik, who, like I said, was much maligned coming into the season, they kept with him and they said, okay, you know what, this year wasn't quite what we wanted it to be. Let's try again next year. And they kept with their guy. They didn't just go say, let's go find the next hot shot quarterback in the portal and see if we could plug him in because that wasn't what they needed to do for their team. That's not what their team called for in that moment. And I think that that's the big thing about Clemson is they do develop their players. They do a really good job of making sure that their players reach the finish line and then bring them up over the top. Another reason I'm super pumped about Clemson next year, I think the schedule gets a lot more manageable. Obviously, no Georgia to start the year. That's going to be a lot better. They do play LSU. That game is at home. Which
I already can't wait for that game.
yeah,
That's week
yeah,
one,
number
right?
one,
That's week one.
yeah, must see TV Saturday, August 30th.
We get
Make sure
that
you're in front of
and Texas versus Ohio State on the
it's going
same
to be
Saturday.
immaculate. Just, I mean, a fantastic day of college football. It can't come soon enough. Like we're pumped about it. But then you got the Troy Trojans. Okay, that's fine. At Georgia Tech could be difficult. Georgia Tech's been a little better in years, but they should win that game. Syracuse is on the schedule. I think they're going to take a step back. We're talking about that in a little bit. North Carolina, Boston College, SMU could be tricky. That could be a tricky one in the middle of October. But then you get your bye week. You go Duke, Florida State, at Louisville. Again, could be a little tricky before you get your Furman, followed by at South Carolina and Palmetto. But look, it's a really manageable schedule. If they can finish that with like maybe 10-2 pessimistically, I think, and going in there, go 10-2, go win your conference, they'll be one of those top seeds. They'll have a bye and they'll be in a great position, to go and make a run and hopefully be one of those teams that gets to stand at the end of the season and say, hey, we did it. We won our championship.
Biggest thing for me is they got to be more explosive on offense. I was beating that drum all season long. They didn't have a consistent explosive playmaker on the offensive side of the ball. Their yards per play statistics in a lot of their conference games were, if you took that and extrapolated it out throughout the season, would be very, very low. We're talking triple digits in the year-long ranking. So got to find some more big playmakers on offense. Got to find, and they're doing that work. They are using the transfer portal this year
They are doing
more
it.
than they have ever in the past under Tapo Sweeney.
And
So
they have really good receivers, right? They need. I think you're right. They do need a little bit more of that explosivity, and they got to get a little bit more out of the run game. Like I know that Phil Maffa had a great year, like statistically everything looked good. They didn't really lean on him that much. I'd like to see him lean a little bit more on the run game than they did this last year. There were moments where Phil Maffa, I feel like, didn't really affect the game. He certainly had his moments. Don't hear what I'm not saying. Phil Maffa affected the game in a lot of ways, but over the season, 8 touchdowns, 1,100 yards, 216 carries. I'd like to see somebody maybe combined between a couple of running backs. Let's find a way to get that up to getting your primary guy like a 250, 260, 12 or 1,300 yards. I think that's what it's going to take for a Clemson team to get over the hump, right? A little bit more of that ground and pound, balance the offense, and then, hit those big shots over the top of those talented receivers. For my money, they might have the second best receiver room in the country. It's just got to actually turn it around in terms of explosive plays. I'm looking right here. Air yards per attempt last year for Cade Klubnik, 8.4. That could go up.
yeah, absolutely. And it was just the long stretches without getting a big player to kind of break the ice. And that's what kept a lot of those games closer than they should have been as well. They were really having to grind out offense. And the Pitt game, the
Florida State,
Florida
29-13
State
was
game.
the final on that one. That wasn't a great showing against a really bad Florida State team.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's because the big plays really help you put those teams away. So that's what I'm looking for the Tigers next year. If you can show me that you are expanding the offense and making strides in that big play category, I'm in on you as a full-on bona fide championship contender. And hey, they get a team in week 1 that likes to give up a big play or two.
They sure do.
So that will be a very good litmus test right off the top.
Gracious, how